what energy system are you actually training when you're in zone 2? Is it an aerobic effort, an anaerobic effort? Do you burn fats or sugars? We're going to try and answer all those questions in this video. But to get started, let's redefine what we mean by zone 2 and how we can determine it, whether it's with some more advanced testing or with some simpler methods. So zone 2, as we usually use the term, typically means low intensity in a form of endurance training. So we're typically going to use a cyclical modality, meaning that the movement repeats itself. Could be cycling, could be running, could be rucking, could be swimming, could be rowing. And when we talk about zone 2, we typically mean the intensity band that is going to be found just below the first threshold. The first threshold is where you go from a low intensity effort to a medium intensity effort. And you can measure this in different ways. You can use lactate. So you could do a lactate test and you can figure out when your lactate goes from low, close to resting levels, to slightly elevated. This is typically how we find your first lactate threshold. We could use gas exchange. So you would have kind of a mask on your face, which would measure your oxygen consumption, your VO2. It would typically also measure your CO2 output. And with some calculations, you can figure out when certain parameters start to change significantly. We call that the gas exchange threshold or the first ventilatory threshold. And so zone 2 is going to be found just below that point. And we typically say that we want to spend time in zone 2 to build volume, to build capacity, whether it's on the mitochondrial side, the capillary side. We want to build a bigger heart as well. All those things are going to be helped by zone 2 training. Now, if you don't have access to those testing methods, you can also use your sensation, your RPE, and typically zone 2 is going to be somewhere between 2 and 3 out of 10. Now, for some highly trained endurance athletes, we might go see that number go up towards 4, maybe sometimes even 5. But typically for most people, low intensity is easy, and it should feel easy as well. It should feel easy in the way that your muscles aren't burning. You can breathe freely. Some say you might have to just hear, if you're talking to someone in zone 2, you might hear just a little bit that they're exercising. Honestly, it's a detail. The point is that it's easy enough that it won't fatigue you for the next day. You should be able to recover from those sessions in 24 hours. A third way you could estimate your zone 2, if you can't test it, is looking at your heart rate. And obviously if it's hot outside or during your training, that's going to impact your heart rate. But let's call it in normal conditions, your heart rate should stay stable throughout a 40, 50, or 60 minute zone 2 or low intensity session. So that's 3 different ways that you can figure out where your zone 2 is. And now let's move on to the next question, which is, what fuel are we burning in zone 2? Are we burning fats? Are we burning sugars? And to answer that, I'll start by saying that we often hear that zone 2 is the best way to lose fat. And I think that's a little bit of a shortcut that we need to address, because it is true that zone 2 is where you'll typically burn the most fat as a substrate, meaning your balance between using sugar as a fuel and using fat as a fuel. Typically zone 2 is where your fat max is going to be found. Fat max meaning maximum fat oxidation point, which again typically happens just under the first lactate threshold. So in your zone 2, at the top of your zone 2, you could say. So it's true to say that in zone 2 you burn the most fat, but you also have to know that you're still using sugars. It's not just fat that you're using. Sugars are always being used. Even at rest, your body uses sugars. Sure, it uses a lot less sugar than if you're doing a high intensity effort, but you are still using sugars, okay? So in zone 2, you could say that we burn the most fat out of any training intensity. If we were in zone 1, we'd probably burn less fat than in zone 2. If we were in zone 3, 4, 5 or above, we would typically burn less fat than in zone 2. But you're not only burning fat, you're also burning sugar. And I don't think we can draw a direct line between using fat as a substrate in zone 2 and then losing fat or burning body fat. Burning body fat is going to have a lot to do with one, quote unquote normal hormonal status to begin with, as a platform to allow yourself for your body to want to let go of the excess body fat that it has. And then it has more to do with your caloric balance, how much you're eating versus how much you're burning, quote unquote, than it has to do with what intensity you're using. I would actually argue that high intensity is probably the best thing to, quote unquote, burn more calories and then get you more active quicker and see better returns on investment when it comes to activities. I would argue strength training is just as important as well if you want to lose weight or burn fat, quote unquote. But you shouldn't just say that, hey, zone 2 is where I burn the most fat, so this is the intensity that I need to be doing if I want to lose body fat. Now that we've addressed the substrate side, fats versus sugars, we can also address the aerobic versus anaerobic dichotomy. And I don't think that these terms make any sense in the context of exercise. And I'm going to explain why. We still hear that high intensity training is anaerobic, right? Oh, you go anaerobic when you pass your second threshold. High intensity is anaerobic training. Then how come you reach your VO2 max, maximum oxygen consumption, when you are at high intensity? There's a bit of a problem there, right? High intensity is anaerobic, but then we reach our VO2 max, which is a maximum oxygen, and who says oxygen says aerobic, maximum oxygen consumption at high intensity. So the aerobic, anaerobic can be used to designate different energy systems, which I'll get into just after. And we could say that phosphocreatine is an anaerobic process in the body, because if you look at the actual chemical equation of the phosphocreatine system, there is no oxygen involved in the reaction. The same could be said for glycolysis, which I'll also get into just after, because there is no oxygen that's directly involved in the 10 enzymatic steps that are qualified or defined as glycolysis. But aerobic and anaerobic doesn't make any sense. We need to let go of this. There's always oxygen that's involved in every process, and I'll get into that just after as well when it comes to energy systems. So I think we need to stop using aerobic and anaerobic as qualifiers in endurance training. Now, when it comes to energy systems, and the main question of this video, what energy system are you training when you train in zone 2? So let's go through each of the 3 energy systems that we know of, at least when we talk about the biochemical energetic process in the body. We think of 3 energy systems that I cited just before: the phosphocreatine system, the glycolytic system, and the oxidative phosphorylation inside the mitochondria, which is typically coined aerobic system. So let's start with the phosphocreatine reaction, phosphocreatine system. The phosphocreatine system is always active, no matter what your intensity of effort is. And for a long time, we thought that phosphocreatine was only being used in the first few seconds of exercise. I'll tell you why that's wrong. But actually, it's always active, because it's the closest thing to the contractile elements inside the muscle fiber, meaning that it's the first way that we use, or that the muscles use, to regenerate ATP and fuel muscle contractions. And the way you can think about the phosphocreatine system is think about a bathtub. When you're at rest, the plug is stopping the drain from pulling all the water out of the tub. And so if you look at the water level inside the bathtub, you have a full bathtub. This, you could make the parallel to having your phosphocreatine levels, concentration levels inside the cell that are quote unquote full, okay? Now, once you start exercising, or you start moving, you start contracting your fibers, what's gonna happen? You're gonna break down ATP, you're gonna have to put that ADP back together into ATP, and phosphocreatine is the first thing you're gonna use. So obviously your phosphocreatine concentration inside the muscle is going to start going down. So your bathtub is gonna start draining out. But even if you start an intense bout of exercise and your concentration, phosphocreatine concentration goes from full to, I don't know, say down to 20%, the thing you have to understand is that you don't stop using phosphocreatine to use a different source. What's happening is, even though your bathtub now is only 20% full, the drain is still fully open because you're exercising at a high intensity, and your bathtub is being filled up constantly by the tap that you opened, which we'll get back to just after, which is your mitochondria, your oxidative system. This one fills up the bathtub. And obviously, if it's draining on one side and filling up on the other, your water level in the bathtub could stay at 20%. It doesn't mean that the flux is at zero, right? We have to distinguish how full it is at rest versus during exercise, and then what is the flux going through, right? The rate of utilization. So obviously, to say it differently, at rest, your phosphocreatine utilization is very low, just there to maintain your basal kind of cellular activity. But then as soon as you start exercising, your bathtub level goes down, but the rate of utilization increases. Does that make sense? So if we talk about phosphocreatine and zone 2, your phosphocreatine system is always being used while you're doing zone 2, and that's also the case in zone 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. It doesn't matter what intensity you're actually pushing, phosphocreatine is always going to be used, okay? Now, what about glycolysis, or anaerobic lactic, as some call it? Glycolysis is the process of breaking down sugars. The end product of glycolysis is lactate. And as we said before, you use sugars even when doing zone 2. You always use sugars when doing zone 2. So glycolysis is active as well. Now, the main difference between zone 2 and higher zones or higher intensity is that in zone 2, all the sugar that's broken down and turned into lactate can be recycled by your mitochondria, because lactate goes into the mitochondria, gets turned into pyruvate, goes into the Krebs cycle, which then feeds your electron transport system inside the mitochondria. Or if your mitochondria is quote unquote saturated, then it can't use all the lactate that's being produced. So that excess quote unquote lactate is going to be pushed into the bloodstream, and it's going to be maybe passed to other muscle groups, to your liver, to your brain, to your heart, any other place that can use or recycle that lactate. Because lactate is a fuel, it's a half sugar, and it's a very important molecule inside the human body. So glycolysis, zone 2, it's always active as well. And you could almost define zone 2 as an intensity at which the glycolytic process does not saturate your mitochondria, and as such, the resulting levels of blood lactate remain low. Now the third energy system, the oxidative system, or the oxidative phosphorylation that takes place inside the mitochondria, is obviously active at every intensity, including zone 2. So when you're at low intensity, as we said, phosphocreatine is the first way to regenerate ATP for the contracting muscle. Glycolysis also provides some ATP to that process. The lactate that's produced by glycolysis goes into the mitochondria, and so and the same can be said of the fatty acids that are used for fat oxidation, quote unquote. Right? We're going to break that down. Going to break it down into I always get those terms mixed up. It's not acetyl-CoA, it's the other one that sounds like it. And then it goes into the mitochondria, and then it goes to acetyl-CoA, and then it goes into the Krebs cycle as well, and then it makes NADH, FADH2, and all that feeds the electron transport system. And at the complex 4 of the electron transport system, this is where oxygen is used, right? And then from that, the proton gradient is created, and then those protons get pushed back out through complex 5, and this is what puts ATP back together inside the mitochondria. And this ATP then helps put phosphocreatine back together, shuttles it out to the cytosol towards the contractile elements, and so goes the circle back around to phosphocreatine, right? But your aerobic system is always active, whether you're doing a low intensity activity and you're consuming low amounts of oxygen relative to your max, whether you're doing a sprint, a very high intensity activity, you're still using a lot of oxygen, right? And again, back to our aerobic, anaerobic false dichotomy. When you're doing a high intensity sprint, you're recruiting a lot of fast twitch fibers. Those fast twitch fibers happen to have a lot less mitochondria than your slow twitch fibers, but to compensate, they use oxygen much, much faster. So technically, per unit of mitochondria, you use more oxygen at high intensity. So we could say that a sprint is more aerobic, if we want to use those terms, than low intensity is. So to conclude this little video, you train and you utilize all energy systems when you're training in zone 2. And I think that energy systems is the wrong focus when talking about training and training adaptations, because it doesn't help us plan better training. And we need to zoom out a little bit, get out of the minutia. However interesting it is, it's fascinating. I've been talking about it for almost 20 minutes and I could do it for hours. I love that stuff, but it's not the thing that's going to help you train better and get better at endurance. What we need to do is get out of those details and try to look at endurance more broadly. And for this, I actually created recently a 30-minute presentation with animations, with graphs, with illustrations to help you see those things more clearly. And I highly recommend you go check out this video. In the meantime, make sure you leave a comment if you enjoyed it, share with a friend, and if you're going to the CrossFit Games this weekend, I'll see you in Albany. Take care.